Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sagan Lalita Sri Vishakan Vidanscha Namam Vishnu Padaya Krishna Preshtaya Bhutale Srimate Jayapata Swamini Namine Namacharya Padaya Taikapa Pradayine Gorakata Damadaya Nagara Gramatarine Namam Vishnu Padaya Krishna Preshtaya Bhutale Srimate Gopi Parada Dasi Namine Namam Vishnu Padaya Krishna Preshtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamini Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pacharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Dishtarine Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Paridanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavyo Namo Namaha Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangum Langayate Giram Yatkripatamaham Bande Shri Guruktarinam Ekritam De Paramanandamanu Chetanishwaram Katanchana Smriti Yasmid Dushkaram Sukaram Bhavet Vismrite Viparitam Syat Sri Chaitanyam Namamitam. Okay, so Rudradeep Prabhu, you know where exactly we left off?
Is it in Japan? The devotees lived in an old farmhouse.
Okay.
After Gurujan Prabhu.
Any volunteers to read today?
I can read, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
All right, sure.
Prabhuji, but I'll just search because in my book I will search where the exact this one is because I'm reading. We have to read from Bhurijana, Prabhu.
No, in Japan. In Japan, the devotees lived.
In Japan, devotees live.
Yeah, we have to start there.
Search here. Okay, I'll read from this one only. Because I didn't attend last two classes, so I don't know where this one is because in the book it is not marked. I'll read. In Japan, the devotees lived in an old farmhouse in the hill country outside Tokyo. Srila Prabhupada stayed in a nearby hotel, installed Radha Krishna deities in the temple, and awarded sannyasa to ISKCON Tokyo leader Sudama. Prabhupada said he knew the pulse of his disciples. Thus, he had recently sensed a tendency in his leading managers to be too absorbed in management and not enough in preaching. He had been telling his secretary that GBC should not simply sit behind their desks and try to centralize power, but should become detached, take sannyasa, travel and preach. With this in mind, he had awarded the sannyasa order to two of his GBC secretaries, Tamala Krishna and Sudama. Now, he advised that they not give up their managerial burden, but follow his example of preaching and managing their GBC zones in a renounced spirit. Shama Sundara. Prabhupada's hotel room had rice paper walls and was very cold. It was like coming back into the northern climate, but without central heating. One day, I came to Prabhupada's room for Mangala Aarti and I had a blanket wrapped around me. I said, "Are you cold, Prabhupada?" I could see he didn't like the cold, but he wasn't going to let that stop him from serving Krishna. Nanda Kumara. At the Sunday feast, there were about 30 Japanese people, mostly young and every single one brought Prabhupada a flower, put it at his feet and paid full dandavats. They were so respectful. Prabhupada said that it was a good sign that these boys and girls are able to honor a saintly person. Bhuri Jana. We had arranged a program in Kobe. Many Indians and Sindhis lived there. It was a long journey out of Tokyo. They put Prabhupada on the third floor of the house and there was no elevator. Prabhupada just put his chin out and walked right up, even though it was a tremendous effort for him. The engagement was arranged in such a poor way that on the same speaking program with Prabhupada was a Mayavadi sannyasi. Prabhupada wanted to speak first, so he spoke in English. There were quite a few Indians there, about 100. Prabhupada explained very clearly and strongly that Krishna is God. Then the other sannyasi began Then the other sannyasi began speaking in Hindi. Prabhupada was just sitting there with his eyes closed, chanting japa. Suddenly he looked at us and said, "Start Kirtana immediately." So we got up in the middle of the sannyasi speaking and started Kirtana. Prabhupada left quickly after the Kirtana. When we got back to the room with Prabhupada, he explained what had happened. He said, first he was preaching nicely, and then he started explaining Panchopasana, about the 5 different features of the Absolute. And then when he said that the Supreme is ultimately impersonal, I could not tolerate it. Prabhupada said, I am like a lion when I am out and a lamb when I am at home. I am like a lion when I am out and a lamb when I am home. Prabhupada had business in Tokyo with his printer, Dai Nippon. He was greatly pleased with the faith Dai Nippon printing company placed in him, giving him hundreds of thousands of dollars credit just on his word. One of the Dai Nippon executives even approached him submissively, inquiring about whether his son, who had died a year and a half ago, had gone to the Buddha. A young Japanese executive who translated the older man's questions and Prabhupada's answers explained to Prabhupada. Since then, he has been very religious. He was the eldest son, Prabhupada asked. 20 years, youngest son. The two executives spoke briefly. He is asking how he can be relieved from such sadness when his son has died. Oh, yes, Prabhupada said. The point is that the success of everything depends on how Krishna is satisfied. That I have explained. He related the example of Sandipani Muni, the spiritual master of Krishna and Balarama. Sandipani Muni's son had died, and he requested his 2 students, my dear boys, I lost my child very young. If you kindly bring him, then I will be very much pleased. So Krishna went to the planet of Yamaraja and brought his son back. So you try to satisfy Krishna and you will be blessed. Your son will be blessed. You pray to Krishna wherever your son may be. He will be happy. You believe in reincarnation. Next birth, Prabhupada continued. Yes. So your son, he
No,
must
here,
have...
Mataji, the young man spoke.
Okay, sorry, Prabhu. Okay, the young man spoke to the elder executive in Japanese. The older man nodded. Prabhupada continued. Yes, so your son, he must have taken a body somewhere. So if you pray to Krishna, your son will be happy. He will benefit. When Prabhupada's GBC secretary for the Western United States, Karandhara, arrived in Tokyo to assist in dealing with the Dai Nippon Printing Company, Prabhupada talked with him about his new project in Bombay. He also wrote 2 letters to Giriraja, urging him to begin constructing the Bombay buildings as soon as possible. He wanted Giriraja to model the temple after Jaipur's famous Govindji temple and erect beside it a modern high-rise hotel. And then you shall have the perfect Juhu plan. Prabhupada said, Hans, now Surbhi, should finish the drawing and get the city council's approval by June so that they could begin the foundation before the monsoon. I do not think that it is possible, Prabhupada wrote. But if you can try for it, that will be nice. Hawaii, May 6th.
Hare Krishna, Mataji, can you continue?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so here once again, this is something that we notice every time, that Prabhupada, when he goes to any engagement,
and there is anything which contradicts the teachings of Krishna consciousness, or anything which is deviant from the teachings of Krishna consciousness, Prabhupada does not keep quiet. He does not keep quiet. Even with Dr. Mishra, he saw that he was very polite in his dealings with him. He was very kind in his dealings with him. But when it came to speaking, Prabhupada just explained the philosophy as it is and said that everything else is nonsense. So, and then, you know that we saw how Dr. Mishra stopped Prabhupada from speaking. So this is something which is unambiguous and it is unmistakable. That Prabhupada was consistently against, Prabhupada would consistently speak against in any forum whatsoever if someone spoke against Krishna consciousness. It's a public lecture, wherever, on a stage. Here, for example, here we saw that meeting, he disrupted somebody's talk. Of course, that's a little bit unusual, but Prabhupada had already finished talking, if you notice. But if Prabhupada were to get a chance after that person spoke, Prabhupada would speak strongly against any teachings which differ from the teachings presented by Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu, specifically as presented to us by Srila Rupa Goswami. So Prabhupada's spiritual master had this title, Sri Rupanuga Viruddha Appa Siddhanta Dvanta Harine, one who destroys any teaching which is opposed to what Srila Rupa Goswami has presented to us. And how do you oppose? Both by writing, speaking, wherever he was. The Rupanugas, I mean, Srila Prabhupada being a representative of Srila Bhaktisartha Saraswati Thakur, being a representative of Srila Rupa Goswami, could not tolerate anything that is different from the teachings of Krishna consciousness. This is something for us also. It is not that only Prabhupada is applicable only to Prabhupada. If we are at a forum that where somebody speaks contradicting the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, we are meant to correct that when we talk. It's not that we say, oh, well, thank you very much, oh, everything is one, oh, we're all on a spiritual path. No, of course, I mean, things like stopping somebody else's kirtan, or somebody else's talk by a kirtan, that perhaps only Prabhupada could do. But what we could do, for sure, is not to tolerate some nonsense. And we should be very conscious of this fact that we should at all times, all places, all circumstances, not tolerate that something which is opposed to the teachings of Srila Rupa Goswami. Not tolerate means when we get a chance, we should oppose anything that contradicts the teachings of Srila Rupa Goswami. Okay, please go ahead.
Hawaii, May 6, 1972. During Prabhupada's week-long stay in Honolulu, he installed 5 duties of the Panchatattva: Lord Chaitanya, Lord Nityananda, Lord Advaita, Sri Advaita, Sri Gadadhara, and Sri Srivasa. He also lectured on yoga at a local yoga meditation center. During his morning walks on the beach, he spoke about the fallacies of Darwinism. Waikiki Beach, he commented, was not as beautiful as Juhu. Nandakumara. At that time, all the devotees in Hawaii were wearing sleeveless t-shirts and bright colors, and they had really big shikhas hanging down very long. Prabhupada said, Gaudiya Vaishnava Shikha is 1.5 inches across. No bigger. Bigger shikhas means another sampradaya, and they have to be knotted. So I told everyone that, and they came back all bright and shiny with saffron shirts and proper shikhas. Govinda Dasi. Prabhupada stayed at a big house on the Makapu side of Oahu, right on the ocean, a very pleasant place. In the morning, Prabhupada would walk on the beach, and when he would return from his walk, he would sit down on a wooden bench on a little rock patio. We would all sit around, and he would give a little morning lecture. Later, he would walk around and around in his room chanting. One evening, I went in while he was chanting. And he said, 16 rounds finished today? And I said, yes, Srila Prabhupada. I am on my 16th round now. He said, that's good. Prabhupada was also thinking a lot about his Bombay center, and he asked me to do an architectural rendering of his idea for the Bombay buildings. Fortunately, an architect friend drew it up very nicely, and Prabhupada was pleased with it. Prabhupada had received a letter from a French disciple, Mandakini Devi Dasi, who was going to join a Russian boy in the Soviet Union. She was going there to marry him and assist him in propagating Krishna consciousness. When Prabhupada read this letter, he smiled in ecstasy. The thought of the Krishna consciousness movement increasing in Russia gave him great joy. Then he turned to Govinda Dasi and said, preach while you are young. When you are old, retire to Vrindavana and chant Hare Krishna. Therefore, these centers in India are being built. But you cannot retire unless you have preached sufficiently. The mind will agitate. If you have preached, you can retire and chant Hare Krishna. So preach as much as possible. Although sometimes Prabhupada could spend only a day or even only a moment with an individual devotee, that brief association would leave a permanent inspiration. The devotees would realize that although Prabhupada had touched them and given them guidance in a way that made these the most important moments in their lives, Prabhupada was also beyond the moment and the place that he shared with them, and was contemplating deeper issues and praying to Krishna with an intensity that they could not yet understand. Prabhupada received a letter in Hawaii from Giriraja that made him doubt his Bombay manager's abilities to deal with the clever Mr. N. Giriraja had reported matter of factly that he had just paid 7,500 rupees to Mr. N. And Prabhupada wrote back, on what account is that paid? Giriraja had intended it to be an installment toward the agreed 2 lakh per year that they were supposed to pay Mr. N after they had received the deed. But why should they be unnecessarily paying Mr. N since they still had no deed? Prabhupada began to worry about his Hare Krishna land. Time and time again, his thinking turned to Bombay, Vrindavana, and Mayapur. But he did not talk much about the problems. Rather, the devotees and non-devotees in each place he visited got the full blessings of his attention. While lecturing on Srimad Bhagavatam, he was in full concentration. And when he spoke privately, cultivating a guest or guiding an individual disciple, he fully gave himself. That he took responsibility for many persons and worldwide matters and did it all so graciously, always appearing before his devotees each morning on a walk or in the temple as fresh as a
Hare Krishna.
morning. Yes, Prabhu?
Mataji, I think we lost you. Please.
Oh, sorry, Prabhu. Is it so, Prabhu? From where it is like...
We could hear her.
Hare Krishna, Induleka Mataji.
Yes, Prabhu. Hare Krishna?
We can see
Sure.
her audio,
So she's very clear, Prabhu.
but can't hear her.
She's very clear. We could hear very clearly.
Haribol, can you hear me?
Your voice is a bit faintish, Prabhu.
JBL went off. JBL went off. Hare Krishna. Can you hear me?
Very
Yes,
clear.
Prabhuji. Now
Very
we can hear you, Prabhu.
What happened to Leela Mai Rukmani Mataji's reading? Suddenly we lost her, right? Or
No. I'm reading Prabhuji. I'm reading Prabhuji. Induleka Devadi is reading.
did others
And-
also lose her, or only I lost her?
Only you, Prabhuji, because others they were telling it is very clear. And I think you had some issues with the internet, Prabhu.
Okay. Sorry. So
Yeah.
please continue.
Yeah. Shall I continue or start with that paragraph, Prabhu?
Where are you? Which paragraph, actually?
Time and time again, he's
Yeah, you please go ahead. Please continue. Please continue.
yes, Prabhu. Time and time again, his thinking turned to Bombay, Vrindavana, and Mayapur, but he did not talk much about the problems. Rather, the devotees and non-devotees in each place he visited got the full blessings of his attention. While lecturing on Srimad Bhagavatam, he was in full concentration. And when he spoke privately, cultivating a guest or guiding an individual disciple, he fully gave himself. That he took responsibility for many persons and worldwide matters and did it all so graciously, always appearing before his devotees each morning on a walk or in the temple as fresh as a morning blooming lotus flower, was the expert nature of his devotional service to Krishna. He was open and simple, with a motive to so pure that anyone could see it. And yet, he was also grave beyond anyone's vision. He served Krishna simply in each time and place, whether riding the hotel elevator with his two disciples in Hong Kong, or curiously noting the details of Japanese culture, or walking on a beach beneath a Hawaiian sky. Los Angeles, May 18, 1972. Word had spread that Srila Prabhupada wanted GBC secretaries to get out from behind their desks and preach. And four American GBC men eager to become sannyasis were waiting when Srila Prabhupada arrived in Los Angeles. Satsvarupa. Prabhupada said that because we were taking sannyasa in the prime of youth, we had ample opportunity to do much more than he. He said he had taken sannyasa at the fag end of life, but that a little is better than nothing. Everyone laughed at the thought that we could do more than Prabhupada. One by one, we went to the Vyasasana and Prabhupada gave us our three dandas and said, now preach, preach, preach. Immediately afterward, Prabhupada had us up in his room. We asked him if there were any special instructions. He said there were two restrictions in sannyasa life. One was that when meeting a rich man and seeing his opulent wealth, we must not think, oh, I have given up everything, but I wish I could enjoy these things. And the other restriction was that when we see a beautiful woman, we must not think, I had a beautiful wife, and now this beautiful woman is here. I could enjoy her. In other words, do not have any regrets about having taken sannyasa. Jagadisha. Prabhupada had all the GBC men come to Los Angeles, where some of them took sannyasa, and we discussed apportioning preaching zones. We had one special meeting with Prabhupada. All the GBC men were sitting there in the room, and Prabhupada looked us all over. He said, are you all convinced? We just sat there. Nobody said anything for about 2 minutes. It was one of the heaviest moments of my life. Prabhupada challenging us. Are you convinced? Are you sincere? As Prabhupada spoke, his GBC disciples listened intently. As far as I am concerned, he said, I am convinced. Therefore, I am pushing on. It's a fact. I am pushing on because it is fact, not fiction. That much I am personally convinced. Whenever someone says, you believe, I say, no, I do not believe. It is fact. So you must spread your conviction by your literature, arguments, preaching, facing opposing elements. But are you convinced? If you are not convinced, then it is not good for me. The first thing is enthusiasm. Don't be dead. You have to work more than me. Anyone who has life, he can preach. So the local president and treasurer of the temple will manage. The GBC can supervise that things are going on. But the first management is that each and every member is chanting 16 rounds and following the regulations. Otherwise, that is our spiritual strength. Now it is in your hands. That was my plan, to give it to the Americans. But you have to be spiritually strong. If superficially you want to be managers, it won't be good. And simply touring is not required. By traveling, you have to do something substantial to increase the society. At the time of Lenin, he had just a few men and he took over the entire country. It is up to you to spread God consciousness. Don't be stagnant. Go and preach. Your duty is to inform them. My dear American brothers, you have so much wealth and pleasure. Use it for Krishna. If not, it will be degradation. Srila Prabhupada met with many US ISKCON leaders in Los Angeles and saw the wide array of Krishna conscious activities in his Western world headquarters. He heard a new recording of Krishna bhajans performed with guitars and other Western instruments produced at the devotee's own Golden Avatar studio. And he approved it, saying, "This is better than George Harrison." He visited the art studio where the devotees were painting illustrations for his books and he made suggestions. Ananga Manjari. Prabhupada was going around looking at all the different temple offices. In one office, Karandara was showing Prabhupada a new computer. "Prabhupada," he said, "all we have to do is type the words Rupa Goswami and then it will automatically write everything you have ever said or written about Rupa Goswami." Prabhupada had been looking at the computer without showing much interest. But when Karandara said the name Rupa Goswami, Prabhupada raised his eyebrows and said, "Oh, yes, everything can be used in Krishna's service." Then we walked out of that office and went to the telex machine. Prabhupada sat before it in the chair and everyone stood around him while Karandara explained what the machine did. It can write a message all the way to New York and they can send a message back immediately. Srila Prabhupada. So Karandara typed on the telex machine, "Hare Krishna, all glories to Srila Prabhupada, please respond." There was no answer. So he typed it out again. And again there was no answer. So he typed it out again. And this time he typed out, "All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada is sitting right next to the telex machine. Please respond." All of a sudden, the machine started typing out a reply. And Prabhupada was sitting there watching it. The type read, "Dear Srila Prabhupada, please accept our most humble obeisances at your lotus feet. We will be very eager to see your divine grace in 3 days in New York." Srila Prabhupada spoke out, "Jai, Hari Bol." The message from New York was signed by many devotees. And Prabhupada just smiled and said, "This is very nice." At this time, distribution of Prabhupada's books by his disciples was taking on a new dimension in America. And Prabhupada heard the latest reports. From the beginning of his preaching in the West, he had stressed printing and distributing his books as the most important method of preaching Krishna consciousness. He said his spiritual master had told him to print and distribute books and that he was following blindly. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had been pleased if a disciple distributed even only a few copies of his magazine. In the beginning years of ISKCON, Srila Prabhupada had also been pleased when his disciples had distributed a few hundred copies of Back to Godhead each month. Gradually, his will for increasing the distribution of transcendental literature had manifested through certain devotees. In Los Angeles, in 1968, Kamala Krishna had daily taken a large Kirtana party downtown. The party, in addition to chanting and dancing, had circulated among the crowd and distributed Back to Godhead magazines. as many as 100 in a single day. When Prabhupada had heard these reports, he had felt encouraged and had asked for the devotees to increase. Prabhupada saw book distribution not only as the best method of preaching, but also as a fair means of income. In India, the brahmacharis in the traditional Gurukula system would beg from door to door, but in the West, such a practice would not be respected. But every gentleman will give a quarter for back to Godhead, Prabhupada had said. Even as Prabhupada turned more toward India and his projects there, he continued to encourage his disciples, especially in the West, to distribute his books. Please increase your program of distribution to the public as well as trying to place our books and magazines in the libraries. I am simply interested in the book distribution. To the devotees in New York, he had written in 1971. I am especially pleased to hear that your distribution of books and magazines has increased. Go on in this way, increasing more and more. Each time someone reads some solid information about Krishna, his life becomes changed in some way. These literatures are the solid ground upon which our preaching stands. So I want that they should be available to everyone, as many as possible. So please try for this. To the devotees in Australia, he wrote, the best news is that you are increasing nicely the distribution of my books and literature. This is the best activity to distribute solid information about Krishna. Our preaching stands solid on these books. So no other movement has such vast background of authority. And to the devotees of Africa, Prabhupada wrote, distribution of books and magazines is our most important activity. Without books, our preaching has no solid basis. Especially the Africans want our books. Srila Prabhupada said that if there were ample books, then everything else in ISKCON would succeed. Practically, our society is built on books. One book is not very impressive. Still, a blind uncle is better than no uncle at all. So it is very nice that one book has appeared and that BTG is appearing at least several issues in other languages. But now try to produce at least 4 or 5 new books per year in several languages. Plus, regularly BTG every month. Apply yourself fully to this very great responsibility of producing numerous books in foreign languages. Back in 1968, when 10,000 copies of teachings of Lord Caitanya had arrived at the temple in New York, Brahmananda Swami had wondered how they would ever distribute so many hardbound books on the lofty philosophy of Lord Caitanya. But in 1970, with the publication of another book, Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, some of the devotees in San Francisco had begun to go door to door, person to person, and sell the books. And not only 1 or 2 books, but 20, 30, even 40 a day. The enthusiasm has spread as devotees in other temples had begun to sell increasing numbers of Srila Prabhupada's books. Next, the young man had begun traveling in vans, going out all day, day after day, to discover the greatest ecstasy of distributing Prabhupada's books. Then a competition had started. Keshavas boasts that the devotees in San Francisco were the best, had drawn challengers from the devotees in Los Angeles, New York, Denver, and Dallas. A Sankirtana fever had begun, and at the center was Srila Prabhupada, assuring that unquestionably book distribution had the topmost priority of all his missionary activities. Prabhupada also stressed that all the devotees should regularly study his books. The books were not only for the public. The devotees must read them and know them, or else how could they preach? In the Los Angeles temple room, Prabhupada would have the devotees take part in pronouncing and chanting responsively the daily Sanskrit verse from Srimad Bhagavatam. Then individual devotees would take turns chanting the verse alone, while the other devotees would again respond collectively. Hridayananda Goswami. When Prabhupada came to Los Angeles in 1972, he started the Bhagavatam class where everyone chanted the Sanskrit. One effect was that devotees became more grave, a little more civilized. Just at that time, things were a little wild in America. The Sankirtana parties were doing so many wild things, staying out all hours of the night, sleeping anywhere, eating anything. Previously, the temples had been a little sedate and actually even a little dry because the devotees weren't giving out many books. And then when the Sankirtana got a little heavy, it was almost like a rodeo consciousness. This wild Sankirtana, like bronco busting. But Prabhupada came and introduced the chanting of Sanskrit mantras word for word, and the devotees submitted to a more grave and formal program. On the 1st of June, Srila Prabhupada left Los Angeles for Mexico City. He said he would return in a few weeks.
Mati,
Yes,
can you please
yes.
pause for a few minutes? We see how book distribution was the specific order that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur gave to Srila Prabhupada. Therefore, he stressed that very much. Everything is meant, the temples, everything is meant to spread the teachings of Krishna consciousness through Srila Prabhupada's books. Every activity that we do in ISKCON, in the Krishna consciousness movement, is meant to increase the spreading of Krishna consciousness through Srila Prabhupada's books. I was recently talking to one devotee, and he made a very interesting point. He said, during Prabhupada's physical presence, lots of books were distributed. And we do not have many devotees. I mean, we had, but relative to what we have now we have millions of devotees. Has the book distribution increased 10 times, 100 times? Do we see that happening? We don't see that happening. So then he said, why is that? So I was thinking, oh, this is a very good observation. That now we have millions of devotees, but the book distribution has not increased 100 times. So we need to really look into this, because Srila Prabhupada said that book distribution is our family business. I mean, he didn't say that, but Vaisheshika Prabhu has written a book, this book called Our Family Business, where he brings out very nicely that this is the, what do you call it? If you could compare ISKCON to a body, in fact, Prabhupada said ISKCON is my body. He did say that. So what is the heart? The heart is book distribution. The book distribution is the heart of ISKCON. So what is the power of book distribution? The power of the book distribution is that every obstacle, no matter what, that you are facing in life will come crashing down. Every challenge, which may have even seemed insurmountable, you will be able to overcome. Every problem that you may have felt, any problem, every problem, whatever you may have felt, which is complex, will get solved. So book distribution can bulldoze everything on the way of pure devotion service, and you can be ecstatically absorbed in Krishna consciousness. So there is nothing which can equal that. Now, somebody may think, what about deity worship? What about, so that means everybody should give up book distribution, everybody should give up deity worship, should give up other things that they're doing? No. The idea is that everybody and everyone and everything in ISKCON is being done. If they take up the mood, that this is all to increase the preaching of Krishna consciousness through spreading Srila Prabhupada's books. That's perfect. Like Jananivas Prabhu was once, in his memories, he was saying that during the early days in Mayapur was really remote. There were hardly any visitors. Visitors were a miracle, So these days, if you can find the campus with only a few hundred visitors, it's a miracle. 365 days of the year, and I'm not exaggerating, even now, during the heat wave, blistering heat, whatever it is, you have thousands of people coming every day into the campus. So during those days, there are very few people coming. So once when somebody came, Prabhupada was looking for Genuous Prabhu. And Genuous Prabhu had gone to get some Bhakti Goddess magazines to distribute to the visitors. So he's the Pujari, right? So Pujari could think, oh yeah, let me show the deities. But he understood that the purpose of this Krishna conscious movement is to give everybody this knowledge of Krishna consciousness by which they can practice Krishna consciousness and be delivered, liberated from the cycle of birth and death by attaining Krishna Prema. So every activity, somebody who's doing prasadam distribution, every activity, if their internal consciousness is, I'm doing this to help spread the Sankirtan movement by distributing the books of Srila Prabhupada, then that activity is perfect. Everything is linked. This is the heart. Book distribution is the heart, or the root of the tree, you could say. Everything can be accomplished if one gives sufficient attention to the activity of book distribution, or if one performs one service in the mood of in that consciousness, that how am I helping to contribute to the distribution of Srila Prabhupada's books. I know that I've opened up something which may like, I remember I used to have a professor in the university who would say, I have thrown some light on the topic, so now you can generate some heat on it. Okay. All right. So any thoughts, questions, reflections?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, Prabhuji, you can speak, Prabhu. Sorry, Prabhu, you can speak.
The Sailesh told the Prabhu will always have the last word, so you can go ahead, man.
Okay, Prabhuji. But just like, because I had a thought, because before I had a thought that all cannot distribute books because it is a little bit difficult for everyone to go out and distribute the books. That is what was my notion, because I was the one of them who never distributed books anytime. I did all other sevas, so many other, this one in the temple and all, but not the distribution. But that myth or this was busted when I went this time to Safari. Somehow or the other, I got the opportunity, and really I could distribute few books, which was really very nice thing, very pleasing thing for me to do that. And really was happy I could distribute though I did very little, very few, not like others who have done very little, but that myth was busted for myself that I cannot distribute books or something like that. I could do that.
Yeah. So one thing is that, see, it is very rare that somebody has so much service or that they cannot distribute a book. So if the focus is there, just like my wife, she's a doctor. So she was saying that during her university days, she often gives this example while preaching. She says that she was saying that during her university days, for an examination, especially medical examinations, sometimes they have to study a lot, not sometimes, all the time they study a lot. And quite often, some professor would say, okay, so you have to study this also, some additional chapter or something. No student would say, oh my God, we already got so much study. On top of that, you're actually asking us to study one more, but rather because it has been told, they end up doing it. So if we have this consciousness, no matter what we are doing, we still have to distribute at least one, whatever, some books at least, then it becomes possible. So, the circumstances where someone is not at all able to do it is very rare. Actually, everyone can do it if they really put their mind into it, even if it's a small amount. of books.
It's not that I didn't want Prabhuji, not because of so much of service, not that I had no confidence. I thought that no, I can't do that one. That's what on my thinking, that I can't do. I can do any other service, but I can't do distribution, book distribution. That was my notion. My personal this one it was. I don't know.
Vaisheshika Prabhu has a very, very interesting formula for this. You know what it is? You don't have to talk one word, okay? And you can distribute a book. You know what it is? Of course, in the West, it's more easier because you get lollipop. Prabhupada once said that when the devotees asked whether we can buy these lollipops and offer it to Krishna and distribute it while we are in Sankirtan, Prabhupada said yes. So what he does is, he has, he demonstrated this time when he was in Mayapur and Puri, and it really works. It really, really works. That, you take a lollipop with you, and then you take one sticker, let's say Jagannath sticker or something attractive. You meet a person, you don't talk one word. You just give the lollipop, give the sticker, give the book. Again, you don't talk after that. You have cards, okay, whether it's English or Kannada, since you're in Bangalore. You have some card which says, kindly give a donation, okay? And just place that in front of the person's face. That's all that is needed. And you see, they'll buy. And Vaisheshika Prabhu was saying that if somebody does not buy, I give a guarantee. If they don't buy, I'll pay you that amount for the book, So if it doesn't succeed. And I've seen that really, really works. Of course, in a place like Mayapur, when my son started distributing, they're wondering, what is this? Lollipops. So then we changed to gajas, kaja. What's that? Where you get the small thing, then people can relate to it. And it really, really works. It's very rare if somebody doesn't take a book by that method. So even somebody who finds it shy to talk, even for them, there's a method. Zero talking, but 100% success. I'm just saying that, if you have some specific thing where you're not able to do it, then let me know. I'll find out a solution from Vaisheshika Prabhu. So everybody can do it.
Sure.
Of course, the only thing with this is that when you say kindly give a donation, somebody may give less, somebody may give more, but overall it works out. We should try to allocate some part of our week or a month or whatever for just spending a little time distributing Prabhupada's books. Shailesh Govinda Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. So you write in your reference to the Pandora's box being opened. So you opened the Pandora's box here. A few questions. I don't mean to be controversial about this, but Prabhupada was in that early stage, rightly putting a huge amount of focus on distribution because we were growing the movement. We're at a stage, as you rightly say, we have millions of devotees, so therefore our propagation should be proportionately higher. But I've asked this question in the past as well. Conversely, maintenance of what we've already gathered is equally important, and I fear that what ends up happening, as we see it here, and I'm being controversial about this, we see such a huge emphasis on distribution. Every new guy is asked to distribute, go out, do book distribution, but there is very little to actually develop that person who's already come. Or those that we've got programs, we have reading programs, and we're terminating reading programs halfway through or reducing them because there isn't enough sufficient people to maintain the Bhagavatam reading programs and stuff like that. There isn't enough facilitators because they're too busy distributing books. So we're kind of so busy digging the hole, we forget that what is it that we're digging the hole for. The purpose of distribution is to develop devotees. But if we then forget to develop the devotees that are here, where's the balance is the point.
That's a good point. It's a good point. Actually, I think the situation varies in different parts of the world. Probably in the place where you are living, the emphasis is very great on book distribution, to the extent that devotees are not being cultivated sufficiently. But there are other parts of the world where there's focus on the cultivation of devotees and not emphasis, whatever. Let me put it like the book distribution is not significantly growing. So I would say that the fundamental principle is you cannot cultivate devotees unless they are also trained to distribute books. But the problem is that the problem is the extent to which they should be balancing out things. So the emphasis, as you rightly said, is that we should, as Prabhupada said, boil the milk. We should sufficiently train our devotees to be properly Krishna conscious. But one element of that training, a critical element of the training, is train them to distribute books. Because without preaching, they cannot be happy. You cannot cultivate them successfully without them being engaged in preaching. So, especially book distribution. So, it should be thought of in terms of the, as they say, paradigm should be, they should be thought of as, okay, these people need to be cultivated nicely. And one important element of it is book distribution. Now, if it is like training, if the mentality, if the mood is like training versus book distribution, it's going to fail for sure. It's like, then it becomes like two different things. Okay, is it training or is it book distribution? Is it training or is it preaching? But if the leaders take an approach of training, book distribution is a part of training them in Krishna consciousness, then it works. Then the balance would still stay right, because the base is they need to be trained nicely. So one critical element of the training is book distribution. But if it is like, should they be trained to practice or should they be trained to preach? Then it becomes a problem. Proper practice involves preaching. As Bhaktisiddhanta said, we read this recently, right today's reading, we saw how Satsarup Maharaj quotes, even doesn't refer to Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, but he's talking about a philosophy that one who has life will preach. So one who is properly trained will also have that inclination to preach. So if it is considered, thought of as, it depends on the leaders. If they approach it as, I need to train devotees nicely, and book distribution is an essential element of that training, then it will work, rather than training versus preaching. So education is needed even to the leaders, I guess. Even for the leaders. I don't know if that.
Yeah, I think so. Prabhuji, it is a problem that I don't think there's an easy fix. It is worrying me to the core, to be honest. There's another aspect to this also. I mean, I see consistently and constantly that, as we just read earlier, that Prabhupada wants those that are distributing to have read his books also. Now, yes, we've heard. I can't hear you, Prabhu. You're saying something.
Please go, Prabhu. I'm not saying it.
Oh, okay. So we've just read that Prabhupada wants us to read the books, not just distribute them. We should know what we're distributing, although we've heard previously that even if you don't understand or haven't read, if you've heard something, you can repeat it. So we've had kind of the contra as well. But clearly, Prabhupada's books are there for us to read and study. That's what he wants. He doesn't want distribution for the books to be sat on people's shelves. He wants them so they're actually read. And us as devotees, for sure, should be reading them without necessarily prioritizing the distribution and not the reading element of it. And I see consistently so many people who misquote things, who misquote even what's in written because they haven't read. And I find that such a dangerous position for us to be in, where we're kind of having not read it, how people are trying to distribute, not understanding what actually Prabhupada is saying in these books. And they're on the street telling people what's in there, not necessarily understanding what's in there themselves. So how do we stand with that?
Again, I would say that the leaders, they would have to, that's their main responsibility, to ensure that those under them are understanding the philosophy properly. So if they don't keep a watch on that, if they're just I don't know how to put it, like say, there is that emphasis on number of devotees made. But when Prabhupada refers to Bhaktivinoda Thakur, that a Vaishnava is like a Chintamani, he can be seen by how many devotees he has made. What is that referring to? It refers to those who have taken to the process of pure devotional service. That is what it means. Not one who has taken to chanting Hare Krishna. That is not the definition of Chintamani. If you make somebody chant Hare Krishna, that is not Chintamani. Chintamani means how many people have you convinced to take to the process of pure devotional service. So when we say, okay, increase the number of devotees, what does it mean? Somebody who chants Hare Krishna and also believes in watching movies and doing all kinds of things is just Hare Krishna, just Hare Krishna is just an add-on to their whatever they're doing. Of course, Prabhupada did say just add Krishna consciousness. But are they adding it with the idea that are they being monitored? Are they adding it with the idea that monitored means in a positive sense, with the idea that they're going to take up the goal of life, which is Krishna Prema? So a lot depends on the quality of the leader. The leader himself is not very clearly fixed. Then it becomes a problem. And I think that is what we are currently facing. We are facing a shortage of enough leaders who can direct their subordinates properly, who can train their subordinates properly. And so all this can be solved, as you rightly said, if they don't read. As if here also we read how Satsvarup Maharaj says, they don't read, then the whole purpose of Krishna consciousness is lost, because everything in Krishna consciousness depends on Sambandha Jnana. And if otherwise, people will not even understand how, for example, why we should not blaspheme the devotees of the Lord. First offense is the holy name. How are they going to understand? They don't read Prabhupada's books. Do not consider the names of demigods like Lord Brahma, to consider the names of demigods like Lord Brahma and Shiva to be equal to or independent of Krishna. How are they going to understand if they don't read Prabhupada's books? To disobey the orders of the Guru, not to disobey. How are they going to understand the importance of this if they don't read Prabhupada's books? So if you look at all the 10 offenses, none of it can be understood without reading the books. So the practice of Krishna consciousness becomes severely crippled if there is no proper practice, proper reading of Srila Prabhupada's books. Therefore, Lord Caitanya Mahaprabhu, when Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya glorifies Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he says that Lord Chaitanya came to give us three things: Vairagya, Vidya, Nija Bhakti Yoga. Three things: Vairagya, Vidya, Nija Bhakti Yoga. So when we practice bhakti according to the Vidya, proper Vidya, which has been brought to us by Srila Rupa Goswami, then Vairagya develops, attachment to Krishna, and Vairagya automatically come. So reading of books is the most, let me put it like this: reading and distributing books. Without reading, if you distribute it, yeah, it's okay. You can do it to a certain extent. But by reading, if you distribute it, then you're properly situated in Krishna consciousness.
Thank you, Prabhu. I'm venting. I'm not sure whether there are solutions to these things, but it does frustrate me quite a lot with these things in terms of how to find solutions to what are essentially core management issues with the lack of philosophy being at the center of it, a lack of bhakti being centered around. I think we're so keen on distribution, we're so keen on developing temples, but we're forgetting the very core element of helping people's bhakti being developed. We're going back to what Bhakti Saraswati Thakur didn't want, is building temples and quite a lot of emphasis on money collection. The book distribution is used as a funding mechanism here. It is, I'm being blunt about it, but it's used as a mechanism of funding. We want to do twice as much as we did last year, not because we want twice as many devotees, because we need the revenue. And that really hurts my heart, in terms of, I don't know what the solution to these things are. Yes, of course, it's all noble. We're still trying to please Krishna, but bhakti is missing at the center of it all.
Yes, you're right. You're right. I mean, the focus should be, I'm very enlivened by the fact that the current Minister for Education in ISKCON is doing a lot to promote the reading of Srila Prabhupada's books. He's doing a lot. So we hope that these things, moment a change occurs, it takes quite some time to take effect, actually. So I think over the next several years, that effect of this strong propaganda, books are the basis. I think you know that, right? There are so many, the Education Ministry has started releasing videos by different devotees. Then they're also releasing 1-minute clips about the importance of reading. And there's a lot of emphasis on reading these. Since the new Education Minister of ISKCON, there has been a tremendous focus on reading Prabhupada's books, and I hope that this culture will take hold. It will, with time, if they continue with their efforts.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Okay. Any other thoughts or reflections? Or questions? Okay, Mataji, you can continue your reading.
Yes. Prabhupada conducted an intensive 3-day lecture campaign in Mexico City, speaking at the National University of Mexico, the Masonic Lodge, and the Theosophical Society, and appearing on a television show with some 30 million viewers. He also held initiations at the temple on 2 consecutive days. Mexico was similar to India, he said, with the pious people and a tropical climate. Even when he walked early in the morning in Chapultepec Park, many people followed him back to the temple. They recognized him as a saint and wanted his benediction. Chitsukhananda. On Sunday afternoon, there were more than 500 people in the temple room. After the lecture, Srila Prabhupada went back to his room alone, and there was a big kirtana with 500 to 600 people chanting, Jai Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada, Jai Prabhupada, 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 Prabhupada. They became very, very ecstatic, and it seemed like the temple walls were going to come down. I was in Srila Prabhupada's room, and he said, "What is this, Kirtana? They are making so much noise." I said, "They are chanting your name." And I went down to see what was going on. And all the people were waiting to come into Prabhupada's room. It was like they wanted to charge up to Prabhupada's room to be able to see him. They kept yelling his name, Prabhupada, Prabhupada. So I came up to Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada, they want to see you. And Srila Prabhupada said, well, let them come. So I immediately arranged that people could come in. He said he had two doors in his room, and they were coming in through one door on the left side and leaving through the door on the right, one by one in a line. They just filtered through like a great parade, coming and offering different words to Srila Prabhupada. Most of the people were saying in Spanish, "Your divine grace, your holiness, please bless me, give me your benediction." Everyone was praying for his benediction, and as the people would come in, they would bow down. Everyone was extremely submissive, and there were many people with tears in their eyes to see the great saint Srila Prabhupada. And they said to Srila Prabhupada, "Please give me your blessings." Prabhupada asked me, "What are they saying?" And I said, "Give me one blessing, one benediction." So he had his hand in his bead bag, and with his finger outside his bead bag, he would point to them and say, "Hare Krishna." And they were all very happy. Prabhupada also traveled to, Prabhuji, can you just pronounce this, Prabhu? Kornevaka.
Whatever, you can go ahead. Just go ahead.
Yes, Prabhuji. Where he lectured out of doors at the city plaza before a crowd of thousands. The audience sat patiently and heard his words translated into Spanish, Chit Sukhananda. Just then, we had turned out our first book, La Conciencia de Krishna es el sistema más elevado de yoga. Krishna consciousness, the topmost yoga system. And Srila Prabhupada, during his lecture at the plaza at Karnataka, saw Haihaya Dasa arrive with newly printed copies of this red book, La Conciencia de Krishna es el sistema más elevado de yoga. Srila Prabhupada looked at him and was very happy to see his book printed. He stopped his lecture and said, "Now you can all take one of these books and read them." And the people actually came up to Srila Prabhupada to get the books. We only brought about 50 copies, but all 50 copies Srila Prabhupada sold personally. The people took the liberty to ask Srila Prabhupada for an autographed book, and he autographed almost all 50 copies. After the plaza lecture, there was a hotel lecture, and then Srila Prabhupada was supposed to go to a devotee's home in Kornevaka to take prasadam and rest. But Srila Prabhupada decided he wanted to return to the temple in Mexico City. He got back around 8 p.m. So from 8 in the morning until 8 that night, he had not taken a bite of food, only a little water. We offered him fruit and things, but he didn't want anything. When he returned to his room, his eyes were shining and his smile was broad. And he said, "This is the way to be happy. Work all day for Krishna." All he wanted was a cup of hot milk with puris and a cup of sugar. He pressed the puris into the sugar and he drank the milk with great joy and happiness. He said, "This is our life, to serve Krishna. Work all day for Krishna and take a little prasadam at night." On returning to Los Angeles, Prabhupada was again the center of the burgeoning Krishna conscious activities there. But again, his thoughts turned to Bombay, and he telegrammed Giriraja, instructing him to settle the conveyance immediately. Giriraja, after receiving Prabhupada's cable, went to Mr. N only to learn of a further complication. After Prabhupada had signed the sales agreement, the Indian government had passed a law obliging Mr. N to pay a 5 lakh gains tax upon executing the conveyance. Mr. N didn't have 5 lakhs at present and told Giriraja that ISKCON should pay it and he would apply it toward the mortgage. But Bombay ISKCON didn't have 5 lakh either. 5 lakhs either. So Mr. N suggested Giriraja take a bank loan or secure funds from ISKCON temples in the US. He promised that in the meantime, he would not sell the land to anyone else. Giriraja tried to get a loan from the bank, but he had no security or credit. He turned to some of the life members for help to see if they could act as guarantors for a loan. But although sympathetic, they could not help him raise the money. Giriraja also began to doubt Mr. N's word. Although naive about legal matters, Giriraja was becoming suspicious of Mr. N's character and of his dealings. Talking with life members, Giriraja learned that actually Mr. N was notorious for illegal business tactics. When previously Mr. N had signed an agreement with the C company for the very same land he was now selling to Prabhupada, the sales agreement had eventually been cancelled because C company had not gotten permission from the municipality for subdividing plots of land. And one of the conditions of Mr. N's sale of the land had been that C company get government permission to use the land. According to some of the businessmen with whom Giriraja spoke, Mr. N, through his political connections, had influenced the government against the C company. Mr. N had seemed very helpful, giving the devotees a good price for the land and even providing workers for clearing it. And Mrs. N had often attended Prabhupada's classes, but there also seemed to be many contradictions in Mr. N's behavior. Hearing of these problems by mail, Prabhupada considered them manageable. If a government tax had been imposed, then the devotee should deal with that and also continue trying for a loan. Certainly, Mr. N was tricky, but Prabhupada felt his ISKCON's position was strong. Giriraja should persist without becoming confused by Mr. N. Prabhupada advised Giriraja to approach Mrs. Sumati Morarji and other supporters for financial help. It is a unique temple in the world, and if you show your wonderful abilities as American and European boys and girls to manage everything superbly, she will not hesitate to entrust you in every way. Therefore, there must always be goodwill and cooperation amongst yourselves for this huge task ahead. I always think of your Juhu place, and I want that it shall be the model for all the world to emulate and respect as the perfect example of Krishna consciousness community. Portland, Oregon, June 8, 1972. From Los Angeles, Prabhupada went briefly to Portland, where 50 of his disciples from San Francisco, Seattle, and Vancouver, as well as Portland, had congregated to meet him. From Portland, he rode by car to Eugene, where he lectured at a large hall before the audience of mostly hippies. Every temple in US wanted Srila Prabhupada, and although Prabhupada could not visit them all, he remained open to brief visits and public lectures in faraway places. He would sometimes confide to his traveling secretary that his disciples should do this preaching, but then another lecture opportunity would arise, promoted by an enthusiastic group of devotees, and Prabhupada would surprise everyone by agreeing to go. After returning to Los Angeles for 4 days, Prabhupada then flew to New York for a week and then on to London for 2 weeks. In London, George Harrison and Ravi Shankar visited him several times at the Bury Place Temple. When George asked if he should shave his head and try to live like the other devotees, Prabhupada replied that he should continue to be a singer. If you tell people to chant Hare Krishna, Prabhupada reminded George, they will do it. July 20. From England, Prabhupada went to Paris, where he lectured and performed an outdoor initiation ceremony at the Luxembourg Gardens. Hundreds of people, most of them student radicals from the nearby university, gathered to watch. Srila Prabhupada began his talk saying, "You French people have a history of being revolutionary because you are looking for a better way of life." When the words were translated into French, the students cheered and applauded. Srila Prabhupada continued, "Therefore, you should inquire into this Krishna consciousness. It's a revolutionary movement for reviving our original God consciousness." About 30 devotees from Germany had come to Paris and most of them, along with many devotees from England, Amsterdam, and Paris, received initiation that day at Luxembourg Gardens. In Paris, Prabhupada also attended a successful 4-day indoor festival where he was pleased to lecture and lead kirtanas each night. July 26. In Amsterdam, Prabhupada installed deities of Lord Jagannatha, Lord Balarama, and Subhadra and lectured at Wandel Park before thousands of hippies. One day at Wandel Park, a devotee was addressing the crowd when Prabhupada suddenly told his disciples to stop. These people are useless, he said. Just hold Kirtana. Later, he wrote to a disciple in the West. We are observing here in Europe, many hippies have become so disgusted with material life, but they are also now so much degraded that they will not hear our philosophy, simply mocking. So our devotees may become very much learn to remove their doubts and become very much fixed up in Krishna consciousness. But so far, preaching to the general public, especially the hippie class, it's better not to preach very much philosophy. Just somehow or other, get them to chant Hare Krishna mantras. And if some of them are curious to learn something, they may purchase one of our books. Only if they chant with us, that will help them. July 29. At Edinburgh, Prabhupada was greeted by almost a dozen reporters from various newspapers in Scotland. Kishora, Edinburgh is a stuffy, puffed up, tradition steeped place. But Prabhupada was very cordial and humble with the reporters. He was giving them so much credit about how nice the country was and how nice Edinburgh was. What nice buildings we have here. And he was saying, you have 2 colleges here. Yes, we have 2. Very proud they were. So you have many students here. Yes. It's a very different, affluent city, Edinburgh. Sorry. Yeah. Uh, yes. Oh, yes, very rich and opulent. And then Prabhupada said, so you have so many students and you have so many nice, big buildings. You have so much facility for enjoyment. And they were agreeing, yes, we have all this. And Prabhupada just looked at them straight and said, then why are your universities producing hippies? They looked at one another and no one could answer. And Prabhupada began to explain how society cannot bring happiness or contentment simply with buildings, stones, and windows. He said, where is the happiness there? In Glasgow, Prabhupada lectured at Woodside Hall before an audience of almost 1,000. Kishora. Prabhupada was sitting on stage on his Vyasasana. The crowd was very large and even the balcony was overflowing. When Prabhupada arrived, the students greeted him like a pop star. They were cheering and whistling. Prabhupada immediately began lecturing very heavily on the basic science of Bhagavad Gita, how Arjuna became a successful devotee by killing all his friends and relatives. At the end of the lecture, I was a little apprehensive as to whether the people would accept that heavy lecture or not, but they cheered and applauded. When it came to question and answer time, one man came all the way down the aisle from the back of the hall and stood at the foot of the stage and looked up at Prabhupada. For several moments, he spoke on and on, talking very proudly, I am this, I am that, and then concluding, I am God. That was the conclusion of his little monologue. The whole crowd was hushed, and I thought, what's going to happen now? Prabhupada simply looked down and let the silence continue for a few moments more. Then Prabhupada spoke. So, you are God. You have nothing more to say? You are not God, you are dog. And immediately the crowd stood up and applauded and cheered. The man just looked at Prabhupada and smile came on his face. With just those few words, he had been defeated. He simply walked all the way back again to the back of the hall and was finished. It was ecstatic because the crowd was participating in the whole thing. They all realized that God is not cheap. Then we had Kirtan, and everyone in the audience was dancing. At that time, they had gotten a bit lax at the door, and the local street urchins from this low class area of Glasgow came into the hall, and they all began dancing and singing. Some of them tried to get up on the stage. Prabhupada was also chanting, and so these kids were all trying to get around him and get on the stage to chant. The devotees started to push these dirty little children off the stage. But Srila Prabhupada said, "Don't do that. These children are all devotees. Let them chant." When Prabhupada finally got up to leave again, he reminded me of some big celebrity. He was smiling and waving and walking off the stage, and the audience were all shouting, "No, no, no, no." So they began chanting, "More, more, more, more." August 1st, when Prabhupada returned to London and heard that Sumati Morarji was arriving there, he went with a group of his disciples to meet her at the airport. He talked with her about his plans for Hare Krishna land at Juhu and of his desire to form a board of trustees consisting of ISKCON's Bombay life members. Sumati Morarji agreed to be president of the board, which would meet regularly and give advice for managing ISKCON's Bombay project. Each trustees each trustee would also contribute a large sum of money toward developing a particular area of the project. Prabhupada asked Mrs. Morarji to donate for the temple. He would request Mr. Khandelwal to donate for the library and Mr. N for two other wings. That Mr. N had not yet produced the deed, however, continued to weigh heavily on Prabhupada's mind, and he questioned Mr. N's intentions and Giriraja's competence. If the only obstacle was the 5 lakh tax, then Prabhupada had already instructed Giriraja to approach ISKCON's wealthy friends and secure a loan. What was the difficulty? But Giriraja's communications sounded as if such a solution was impossible. On August 27, Prabhupada telegrammed Giriraja. Has conveyance deed been signed? If not, finish immediately and wire details. Again, Giriraja went to Mr. N, although anticipating Mr. N's reply. This time, however, Mr. N added yet another complication, reminding Giriraja that ISKCON had not yet obtained permission from the Charity Commissioner. ISKCON was a public charitable trust and so required permission from the Charity Commissioner before acquiring property. Mr. N put the burden back onto ISKCON. At the Charity Commissioner's office, Giriraja learned that he should have applied for permission 6 months prior to signing the agreement for the land. To Giriraja and the other devotees in Bombay, the affair had become a huge Gordian knot. New Vrindavan, West Virginia, August 30, 1972. Only 2 days remained until the Janmashtami celebration, and more than 300 disciples had gathered to be with Srila Prabhupada. Janmashtami, Krishna's appearance day, is always followed immediately by Srila Prabhupada's appearance day. And this year, with so many devotees gathered in a holy place with Prabhupada, the occasion promised to be especially auspicious. Prabhupada had agreed to lecture every evening in an outdoor pavilion constructed for the occasion atop one of New Vrindavan's many hills. The lecture series was titled Bhagavata Dharma Discourses. And through these meetings, Prabhupada set an example for his disciples that they should hold similar festivals in other parts of the country. Through Bhagavata Dharma discourses and book distribution, the Krishna consciousness movement would increase its purifying influence throughout the world. Prabhupada lived during these days in a small wood frame house in the New Vrindavan woods. He regularly received visitors and lectured in the evening. Each evening, before his lecture at the pavilion, The devotees would hold a kirtana and carry Prabhupada up the long, steep hill on a palanquin, and afterward, as they carried him back down, he would be surrounded by chanting disciples bearing lanterns and torches. Sureshwara. The path from the pavilion wound down and around on its way to the temple. I got there at dusk and beheld Srila Prabhupada floating jubilantly in his palanquin atop a sea of devotees. There were hundreds of devotees with tumultuous kirtana and roaring, plus dust was being kicked up everywhere from all the people. It looked spectacular, like a panoramic scene from one of those epic movies. The Ten Commandments or Exodus, only much more, because it was transcendental. I just fell down in the dust as Prabhupada's palanquin came gliding past. It was very wild, very devotional. But to Gopala, it was a small palanquin carried by 4 men. There were some ropes for Prabhupada to hold on to, and it wasn't a very comfortable ride for him, but it was an amazing scene. Devotees with the torches, electric torches, and fire torches, and lanterns, and Prabhupada coming down in his palanquin down the trail. Hundreds of devotees were surrounding him. Kirtana was roaring. I kept trying to get up close to Prabhupada and get a glance. Janava Devidasi. We were running down the steep hill in the dark amid the loud chanting of a river of devotees, and our feet seemed to never touch the ground. About halfway down, I caught up to the palanquin, but then I realized that being close to Srila Prabhupada meant far more than physical proximity, and that I needed to become much more serious about Krishna consciousness in order to feel less distant from him. On Janmashtami night, Prabhupada went to the temple and listened to readings from Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, about Lord Krishna's birth. Around 2 a.m., he noticed many devotees were nodding. You are getting tired, he said, smiling, and he ended the program. Even in the midst of such a large festival, Prabhupada was again plunged into the struggle over the Bombay land. A letter arrived from Giriraja explaining his failure to secure the 5 lakh loan owed the government and the government's refusal to grant permission. He also mentioned his suspicion that Mr. N was influencing the charity commissioner's decision. Prabhupada had a copy of purchase agreement with him and he studied it carefully. Again, he concluded that his supposition was strong since he was occupying the land according to the terms of the agreement. He had paid 2 lakhs as promised, but Mr. N had not turned over the deed. Now more money was being demanded, and Prabhupada had said Giriraja should pay this money and get the deed. As for the permission from the government charity commissioner, there was no mention of it in the agreement. Although Mr. N's tactics were apparently bewildering Giriraja, Prabhupada saw them as only empty bluffs. He telegrammed Giriraja, take bank mortgage payoff N. Before receiving any reply from Giriraja, Prabhupada sent another telegram. Why do you say conveyance impossible? Everything clear in agreement of purchase conveyance to be executed immediately according to terms of agreement of purchase. On Srila Prabhupada's appearance day morning, he went up the hill to the pavilion to speak. It was a beautiful late summer's day, and he sat on the stage on a red Vyasasana beside the deities of Radha Damodara and Lord Jagannath. In addition to hundreds of his disciples, hundreds of guests were also present. The entire audience numbering about 1,000. The festival was a newsworthy turnout of the Hare Krishna movement, and reporters from the New York Times and other newspapers were on hand, along with television film crews. Prabhupada spoke, explaining how, although an observer might misunderstand the devotees' worship of their spiritual master, no one should think that the spiritual master was presenting himself as God. Prabhupada compared the spiritual master to a tax collector. As the tax collector collects money only on behalf of the king, so the spiritual master receives honor but on behalf of Lord Krishna. Everyone should serve and bow down to the Supreme Lord, and the spiritual master comes and collects obeisances and worship on behalf of God, who accepts any sincere worship of the spiritual master as an offering to himself. Prabhupada ended his lecture, and a great feast climaxed the day, and a half of fasting. Prabhupada then returned to the backyard of his little house, where he talked with some of the devotees. Hridayananda Goswami. Prabhupada was taking his massage, sitting on a straw mat outside his cabin. Suddenly, two little kittens appeared by his mat, and they were rolling around, tumbling. They were wrestling, tumbling, rolling around and around. Immediately, I thought, oh, they are contaminated. I have to get them away. The cats actually tumbled right onto Prabhupada's mat. They rolled in a little furry ball right over to Prabhupada's feet. Prabhupada began tickling them under their chins. He was laughing, rubbing under their chins. Then he turned to me, sort of in a very jolly mood, and said, just see, even here there is love. Shrutakirti. I was in charge of the kitchen, so I was too busy to see Prabhupada at all. He was there for a week, and practically the whole time I didn't get to see him. I was so upset. I was doing all this service, and I had no opportunity to see Prabhupada, always cooking until midnight. I felt so bad. So the day before Prabhupada left, Kirtanananda Maharaja came up to me and said, so you are going to be Prabhupada's servant. I said, oh no, this is wonderful. No, this is terrible. I was so worried. Then he said, you will be leaving tomorrow morning to go to Pittsburgh. I thought, wow, that was quick. I didn't know anything about it. The following morning, Kirtanananda Maharaja brought me over to the farmhouse Prabhupada was staying at. He took me into Prabhupada's room and said, this is Shrutakirti. He's going to be your servant. Prabhupada looked and I paid my obeisances. Kirtanananda Maharaja said, he cooks very well, Prabhupada. And Prabhupada said, that's very good. But he hasn't massaged. Maharaja said, I had never done it before in my life. And then Prabhupada said, that's all right. Anybody can massage. It's very easy. Satyanarayana. I was with a group of devotees. We would travel around the country in an old bus preaching. On the bus, we had deities, a kitchen, and a shower. Prabhupada was outside of his cabin when we drove up in the bus. When he came on, we received him just as in a regular temple, and we gave him Charanamrita. He looked at everything and said that there should be hundreds of buses like this. It wasn't such a big event for him, but he really liked it. Satsvarupa Dasa Goswami. I saw different leading devotees go down to that house to see Srila Prabhupada on important business. I had no important business that hadn't been answered by him in letters, but I began to feel anxious that I was not going to him while others were. Finally, one day my anxiety grew so great that I decided I would go and see his divine grace. When I arrived at the door of the house, Prabhupada's servant gladly let me in, and in a moment I was seated before Srila Prabhupada. He was seated to take his massage. I expressed to Srila Prabhupada that I had no very urgent questions to ask him in particular, but that I had become anxious to see him, and so I had come. Prabhupada replied that I should know better than to come to him out of such anxiety. He said that he had already answered everything in his books. Actually, this was very inspiring. On the one hand, he was telling me that as an older devotee, I should be assured that by studying his books, everything was there. Not that out of anxiety I should feel a lacking and on an impulse have to personally see my Guru. But now, since I was in his presence, Srila Prabhupada asked me, "What are you doing?" When Srila Prabhupada said that, I got a strong impression that he was regarding me in the proper place as a tiny fool. Here I had just been initiated sannyasa and I was coming before Prabhupada with my assistant and asking for his attention. Now that I had asked for his attention, he gave me a surveillance glance and by his question, he seemed to imply that I was doing nothing or very, very little to spread Krishna consciousness. That was how I interpreted his question. What are you doing? I replied that I was, according to the instructions that I had received from him in a letter, going from temple to temple in my zone and implementing his desire that the students there study the Srimad Bhagavatam in the morning class. I had previously felt very confident that I was exactly following direct orders I had been given in a letter from him. But to my surprise, in that room in New Vrindavan, he began to tell me that visiting temple was not the most important thing. He said that he was pleased with the program of Vishnujana Maharaja, who was traveling on a bus. He said I should do like that. I immediately replied, then your instruction that I should go to the different temples is not very important. I should take a bus. And Srila Prabhupada became annoyed and said, it's not that because one thing is more important, the other thing is less important. Everything is important. Not that just because I say this is important to travel in a bus, now you say traveling to the temple is not important. Krishna's head is important and Krishna's foot is important. Everything about him is important. While Prabhupada participated fully, both formally and informally, at New Vrindavan, he still carried a special burden of concern from Bombay. Although he had appointed GBC secretaries to oversee the Krishna consciousness movement in various parts of the world, he was the real GBC secretary of India. Wherever he traveled, therefore, he remained partial to those projects. He was setting the perfect example of a GBC secretary. While consci- conscientiously tending to practical affairs, he remained always transcendental, fully dependent on Krishna and always preaching. After drafting a telegram to Giriraja or hearing of difficulties in Bombay, he would immediately return to his peaceful routine and active preaching. He would take his late morning massage, bathe, put on tilaka methodically and delicately, say his Gayatri mantra with silent composure, take his prasadam, rest for an hour, and then in the evening, after a full day's activities, go into the temple room of whatever temple he happened to be in, sit on the Vyasasana and chant Jai Radha Madhava and speak pure Krishna consciousness. September 8. After New Vrindavan, Prabhupada went to Pittsburgh where he attended a successful engagement at a large hall, the Syria Mosque. He also met with a Catholic bishop whom he asked, why do the Christians kill cows in slaughterhouses and thus break the commandment, thou shalt not kill? Prabhupada had often asked this question of Christian priests and was always unsatisfied with the answer. This was no exception. In an informal gathering in his room, Prabhupada stressed outgoing preaching programs and he advised his newly initiated sannyasis present to follow the example of their god brother Vishnu Jana Swami to travel in a bus from town to town and hold festivals and distribute books and magazines.
Okay, Mother, you can stop there.
Yes.
Okay, so we saw a lot of interesting things. One place where Prabhupada says about how if they are not, I mean, this philosophy is not meant for people who are too disoriented in their lives. So we should just have kirtan first. so that they can get induced to accept Krishna consciousness. And here we see how, just give me a second. So here we saw how Srila Prabhupada is talking to Satsvarup Maharaj. This in regard to our earlier discussion, how the leaders are meant to both see the standards in the temple and also go on with the preaching. Both of them are important, not one or the other. Like when Satsvarup Maharaj said that he was traveling to temples, Prabhupada said, brought up about Vishnujan Swami traveling in a bus. So both aspects of Krishna consciousness are important. They're inseparable, practice and preaching. So, I have nothing more to add there. If any of you have some reflections or thoughts or questions. Okay, so thank you all for joining. We'll resume again next Sunday with the Bombay saga continuing. It'll come up again. We saw intermittently here, coming up here and there, but it will continue and it'll take a lot of twists and turns. Okay, so thank you all very much. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyascha paridanam pavanebhyo vaishnavyo namo namaha. The Prabhupada